Welcome to a topic analysis of school accountability, brought to you by Joshua Taper, Bart Taylor, and Joe Yu.
Students today need to know more than just the basics to be able to function in the global economy. Our kids today, I think we can all agree, are a lot more worldly than we were growing up. They know more about what's going on in China and Japan and Russia and all these other countries, and they need to be able to relate that information to the world that is immediately around them. Um, Based on our readings, I think they talk about how the kids have to kind of step outside that box and develop their abilities to find information, to be able to process it, and then form it into some level of process. Um, as a school, we need to push a little harder. We need to innovate a little harder. And I know some of you are looking at that in your own work, how we can improve in those areas. And hopefully, as a cohort, we're all going to push and maybe start making some changes there. Part of the problem is really recently, and I think Ken Robinson said this really well in his TED Talk. Um, we have not innovated. It's more know things and regurgitate them for a standardized test. As I talked about in the last slide with Ken Robinson and his thoughts about living in a society where we're just regurgitating information, I think some of that, if not a lot of it, boils down to the types of assessments we're taking. And in our readings right now, I think they're making some good points in when we assess, we not only need to give tests and look at data, but we need to look at a variety of types of assessment. And I won't read these to you. I mean, we're all adults. We can handle looking at these, but we need to have multiple types of assessment so that we are properly assessing our students and we're properly assessing ourselves so that we are helping our students through our own personal growth. Just to tie off the testing and assessment aspect, it is good to compare to a national standard, to a national norm. Um, However, there's not a lot of value in comparing schools to one another because even in our discussions on the board, we all teach in very different school districts, whether it's urban or rural, high socioeconomic levels, low socioeconomic levels, where English is predominantly the first language, where it's not predominantly the first language. So comparing individual schools to one another does not necessarily serve a purpose, but comparing these schools to a nationally accepted norm would have a purpose. Now, getting to that norm may be, difficult. Um, One of the problems that education face, and Ravitch talks about this in her work, is how the government, whether it's a state government or the federal government, applies educational frameworks in an ad hoc manner. We're kind of always going with the new and the sexy um, application. Everybody's on board with, devices and technology because that seems to be the wave of the future. But how we're applying it is an issue. And I know that's something my research is in and Bart's is in. So sometimes in jumping on these bandwagons, we're ignoring the fact that sometimes they don't work or it's in conflict of what we have done previously. Just like anything else in a social institution, learning has to be built around some solid framework that will not only allow for solid work, but then also open up for creativity. Building on what I addressed in the previous slide about having a kind of common standard, and I'm not addressing Common Core here because that may be a different area of research later, but um, it's a good idea to set clear and measurable performance goals, whether it's in a classroom, state level, federal level, and expect students to meet those high standards. I think we can hopefully I'll agree, or maybe it's just me at my school, a number of teachers I hear kind of complaining that we're not challenging our students enough. We're not holding them to a high enough standard. And that's to all of our detriment as we're putting students out in the world that maybe are not quite prepared. Um, it's it's important to have the data through the standardized testing. We just, we kind of have to find that method that's going to work, so that we can compare how we're doing to a national level. One of the points with standardized testing that I liked, and that's why I wanted to put in this information on the next couple slides, is when we look at accountability, one of the big goals is to make sure all stakeholders are informed, not just students and administration, but parents and the community, so they can understand how the education process is going in their community. Um, what these tests don't take into account, because they tend to measure reading through the English test, obviously the math through the mathematics, and occasionally the social studies and science, depending on which test you're going to look at. They don't take into account everything else that applies to students. We can all hopefully agree that not all students are good test takers. We've got our high academic students that are your book smart kids, but what about those kids that are going to be the artists of the world or the writers of the world that maybe aren't good on a math test or a science test, so it doesn't show up in that way? Um, what about those kids that are English as a second language students that maybe they don't test well because they don't understand the questions? What about those kids that, because of their socioeconomics, didn't have breakfast or didn't sleep the night before? So they're not going to do well on a test, not because they're not intelligent, not because they can't do the work, but because of their home lives, they're not going to score well. Building on the last slide and talking about our socioeconomics, um, our society has evolved since our school system is set up. When in the turn of the century during the Industrial Revolution, we were built on what can we build, what can we grow, how can we harness the resources of our country. Today, the resources of our country are the people. We live in a service-based society, and if we are not churning out students that can be problem solvers and critical thinkers and imaginative thinkers, um, we are not going to continue to be the power that we are. And I know that simplifies things, but when you look at innovation, whether you're discussing technology, um, cars, whatever, these kids have to not only have the base knowledge of their craft, but then they have to be imaginative in reaching for their goals. So I've given you some statistics on this one as to what can happen, just showing like some real estate numbers and things like that if we are not kind of helping our students think ahead. This information, I've used it in a previous post, but it's still striking to me. It's a study out of Canada, talking about how social inequalities along the race, social class, and gender lines are shown in high school and really can show negative impacts on testing and education. Um, this is obviously a problem, and I think with everything going on in the news today, this is a problem that really needs to be examined. Um, I see that dramatically in the district I work in. Um, I work in a higher socioeconomic district where the kids are just expecting to go to college. And I know some of you work in districts that are not like that. And I'd be curious to hear your input on this. But we can see through some of the racial issues in some of these other cities that race and social class are an issue. And how does that apply to education, and how can we help these students, these children, overcome these barriers? Because I don't they're not limitations, they're barriers to these kids. And maybe they're just barriers in their own minds, but you know, our country needs assistance in this respect, and I think it's up to us to help with that.
President George W. Bush started the No Child Left Behind program, and it was placed into effect on January 2002. This led to an educational system supporting the ideas of accountability, high stakes testing, data driven decision making, choice, charter schools, privatization, deregulation, merit pay, and competition among schools. The interpretation of No Child Left Behind was left for each state to decide on how it would enforce testing and the accountability standards. So let's see how No Child Left Behind has been interpreted in Texas.
There are more than 8,000 public schools in Texas. So how do you know how your school is doing compared to the one across town or in another part of the state? Well, every year, the Texas Education Agency, that's us, uses an accountability rating system to help answer that question. Almost every school gets one of two ratings: met standard or improvement required. That's easy enough, but what's the secret formula behind these ratings? No secret, really. We look at four basic areas. First, student achievement. Simply put, it's STAR test scores for the year. No, tests don't tell us about your marching band or school spirit, but it is a way to fairly evaluate how all kids are doing on the same test in all parts of our state. Second, student progress. Are kids making progress in basic subjects like math and reading from year to year? If so, that's a good thing. Third, how are we doing at closing the performance gaps? Every student, regardless of economic background or ethnicity, should be doing well and making progress compared to everyone else in their class. Finally, post-secondary readiness. That's graduation rates and diplomas. And soon it will look at things like how many kids took dual credit classes or did well in career tech, things that translate into success after high school. That's it, the secret formula. And for those who get a Met Standard rating, there are up to 7 added honors, we call them distinctions, that a school can earn in areas such as outstanding achievement in reading and math, or just getting kids to take the SAT or ACT. Want to learn more? Check us out online. We're the Texas Education Agency.
So the Texas Education Agency boasts that there's a simple secret formula to school accountability and ratings. They say that it's simply meeting standards, but there are consequences for not meeting these standards or not making adequate yearly progress. TEA will come in and assist schools, but that can lead to school closures, reconstitution, or even student transfers. This also leads to teachers that just teach to the tests, and some schools have been caught cheating because of merit pay and they want to get kids to pass the test. Ravitch boasts that accountability makes no sense when it undermines the larger goals of education. Because of the effects of accountability and No Child Left Behind, all sights are set on educational reform. This reform is also strengthened because of the current paradigm shifts due to technology. Ravitch states that it is our belief that transformation of education is most likely to succeed if it occurs by the way of a design process undertaken and owned by educators in partnership with community stakeholders. Schools must be re-envisioned and redesigned by the people who will use them. We have to look towards cultivating a love of learning in our students in order to develop self-directed, self-motivated learners, or lifelong learning.
In 2001, the federal government passed the No Child Left Behind Act, which provided identified schools with federal funds for the purpose of supplementing the instructional program of schools to ensure a high-quality education for students that would help them meet the state standard, which currently is the STAR test, State of Texas Assessment for Academic Readiness. Campuses with a low income percentage of 40% to 100% are considered campus-wide Title I campuses. Campuses with a low income percentage of 35% and 39% are considered targeted assistance campuses, and campuses with a low income percentage below 35% are not eligible for Title I funds. And these supplemental federal funds, Title I, are used by the schools to and for accelerated instruction for struggling students, to provide professional development for teachers and paraprofessionals, also to hire highly qualified personnel, and give additional resources such as technology, personnel, materials, instructional programs, and softwares, and also to encourage parents and family involvement. Title I Part A funds cannot be used to provide services that are required by state law or the State Board of Education rule or any local policy. At some Houston ISD schools, Title I funds are spent on professional development for staff, college and career readiness programs, tutorial classes, parent involvement programs. Hoover Dempsey and others, 2011, have shown through their studies that parents' active involvement in the students' schools have positive link in increased academic outcomes.
Currently, Frisco ISD is following the data. What they've done is they've taken the test numbers, broken them down, and then to push kind of a common planning, they've made sure that same subject teachers, so if you teach English, all English 1 teachers are together, all the world history teachers are together. They all have the same planning period. That way they can compare data across not only their classes, but across the district. They're also pushing to constantly be testing the kids to see are they reaching specific goals by using a variety of CBAs. They're honestly kind of pushing a little towards a homogenized lesson planning, if you will. Taking a little bit of the freedom away from each teacher to do what they want in favor of a more test-oriented goal.
In College Station ISD, we have the great story of AYP, or Academic Yearly Progress, and it helped us all truly understand what AYP was all about. We were a top-ranked school because of our SAT scores. We had low dropout rate, and it's a fantastic school, mostly because of the community surrounding the school is Texas A&M University, and we have professors, kids, and everyone's used to the idea of post-secondary education. So students were engaged in learning and engaged in themselves. Well, years back when we had Hurricane Katrina hit Louisiana, we absorbed at our school a huge amount of students from Louisiana, primarily in African American males. The year after we absorbed them, we realized all of a sudden we did not meet academic yearly progress, and we went from a top-ranked school with amazing marks to a school that did not meet AYP, and so we were alarmed. But the good news is that it did show us that there was a gap that desperately had to be addressed. We weren't teaching the ways that supported all students in this demographic, and we had to help them learn. And so it was odd going from a stellar school to a school that almost felt shame for not meeting AYP. But as teachers, we had pride in what we do, and we took it upon ourselves to make sure we would lower this gap and help all students be successful in College Station ISD.
In the school accountability system, one potential benefit I was able to witness is the parent-school accountability and parent-school involvement. When the schools are properly using the Title I funds for parent involvement, the students are the recipients of this benefit, and it helps them to increase their academic success. In Houston ISD, Title I grant supports activities that focus on parental and family involvement, such as School Parent Compact. These are statements of shared responsibilities between school and parents. Also, parent involvement policy. This is a plan that the schools have to involve parents and to involve them actively. Also, there is the Parent Advisory Council, and these are meetings, and these are regular face-to-face meetings to provide trainings to parents as well as collaborate with them about the progress of their child's and or children education. And then there is the parent involvement surveys. This is a district-wide, also called Your Voice survey, which evaluates the campus's parent involvement program. And lastly, the federal report card, which is also actively provided to the parents for them to be on top of the performance and on top of the results and the status of the campus. The schools also send letters home with copies of the report and internet link so that the parents can easily access and be able to examine the schools. I hope that in the future, even if there are any changes in the policies or funding, I hope that Title I funds continue to support to attract the parents to the schools, and especially the low economic schools where parents tend to be less engaged. And through this fund, I hope that the school administrators will continue to attract and get the parents involved in the lives of our students.
Thank you for your time and interest in school accountability.